Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Practice Discipleship Initiative webinar series. We're back again. My name is Dawn Troutman. I'm your host throughout the series. I am from LutheranLifeCoach.com, and you may also recognize me from the Extravaganza planning team, our yearly event, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the webinar. I'm coming to you today from the New England Synod, and I'm excited to be here. This initiative is a dynamic partnership between the ELCA Youth Ministry Network, the ELCA and its youth gathering, and the ELCA seminaries and colleges. Practice Discipleship offers leadership development for the sake of faith formation. The theme for this year is Frame. So there will be a series of 6 webinars. You see them all listed there. They all focus on Lutheran theology, ministry theory, and practical skills relating to our theme. Today's webinar is titled Framing Christian Community, and our presenter is Reverend Josh Graber, Mission Developer for Altier, which is a gap year opportunity for young adults to explore their gifts, passions, and calls through peer relationships and host community. This Altier, and he'll talk more about it, it's part of LIFE, which is another acronym meaning Lutheran Immersion Formation Experiences. So under that umbrella also falls other things you may have heard of, such as Young Adults in Global Mission or Urban Servant Corps. So before we get started, I just want to draw your attention to the question box. You'll be able to ask questions and make comments as we go. Look at it's on the right side of your screen. If you look over there, you'll see a place to type your questions. We will keep an eye on that box, and I will ask some of your questions to Josh as we go along. So let's get started. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate that, Dawn.
We're happy to have you here. Take it away.
I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to be a part of this, and really appreciate being invited to do a session for Practice Discipleship. And I just think this is one of the things in the church that is able to really create culture change and help us move at the speed of the Spirit. And really appreciate being a part of it and being able to share something that hopefully others can use and share with their friends and networks as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you to Practice Discipleship, and for everybody that's what do you say, tuned in, connected? What do you say for a webinar?
Well, logged in.
Logged in. Everybody that's logged in for this, and just so you know, I really start this session with a strong sense of gratitude for the opportunity. So what are we up to in the next hour? Let's look at the session description first. It says, this lesson will present a way of walking alongside individual young people, communities, and families as we help them frame their lives by learning through relationships with surrounding community, learning from an intentional community, and learning about yourself through community. We will explore practices of faith that help us frame our lives in solitude and in community. And then I ended with the good Lutheran question, what does this mean? And some of you might be picking up on this already, but what that means is that I had no idea what the session was going to be about at the time the session description was due, and so I wrote as general a statement as possible, but I think that that statement is pretty good, and it connects with what we're going to do today. So what I want you to focus on is the overview. And I think that is still right on for what we're doing, and I want to focus you on the word reimagining. And for me, this word is a description of God's work in the world, and one that we as a church are really called to. I think a church without imagination, it might as well be dead. I mean, that's really a big part of what we're doing, and a big part of how we respond to the gospel when we're freed from our fears and we're able to act and imagine how we can be in the world as guided by the Spirit. So I think we as a church are not dead, and our stories are alive with a witness to what God is up to in the world. And this session is intended to be an opportunity to help you reimagine your understanding of yourself by reflecting on your own story, and to help you reimagine your perspective on the world by listening to other stories. So inspiring reimagination and changing perspective is one of the ways that I understand what it means to be prophetic. It's what Jesus did. We throw around the word prophetic a lot, but For me, it's doing what Jesus did, what Luther did, and it always points us back to a God that is alive and always challenging us in new ways. So if we look at the learning objectives here, you can just throw them out there. What we're going to be doing today, in kind of a shortened form of the longer session here, we're going to be exploring how we live out Lutheran identity with the world. We're going to be introducing tools for self-reflection and honoring those we meet, for attentive meetings, as I like to say, so that we're more fully in relationship with those that we meet, both old friends and new. And we're going to be understanding that art of listening carefully to another story and thinking about how that's countercultural, especially in today's culture, how stopping and listening to someone is actually a service. It's an opportunity. Showing that you care and just helping that person stop to reflect on their story, to get off the fast track and spend some time with you and spend some time with God in talking about what really matters in the world. Then the next point, introducing the practices that help us see Luther's priesthood of all believers. That's another way of saying that is the ministry of the baptized, by drawing out the abundance of faith practices, gifts, and wisdom that are already present in our communities. And this is a big part of culture change in the church, shifting from a hierarchical model, of having all these different layers you need to go through in order to tell your story, in order to share your ideas, to being more of an open source model where everybody's voice has value, and it's much more easy to connect and shape the culture. So I like to call this session a Mr. Miyagi session, or a Karate Kid lesson. And if you've seen the movie Karate Kid, you'll maybe recognize this photo. But the story is that Daniel's son wants to learn karate, and he meets this guy, Mr. Miyagi, and Mr. Miyagi tells him he's going to teach him karate, but that lets you understand that of course we do want to have the 5 steps to highly effective discipleship, and so did the disciples, and we might get there, but we're going to get there through reflection and the sharing of stories the same way Jesus did. There we go.
Yeah, so, we knew we'd get there. Thank you.
So, if you're like me, some of these photos of Jaden Smith just seem like he's making fun of you, telling you can never be this flexible. But these are of course the images of the Karate Kid once once Mr. Miyagi's lessons are put into practice. So the next slide is a picture of me. You already saw this before in the first introduction, but I'm a mission developer in the ELCA for a new ministry called Alt-Year, and I also put the "what does this mean" question there. For me, being a mission developer is the place in the ELCA that is most friendly to entrepreneurs, and I really understand myself as an entrepreneur, someone that is called to create networks, connect with people in new ways, and really to try to think about things that don't yet exist, and partnerships that don't yet exist, by helping to bring that story and that vision to others so that they can be a part of it as well. And for me, that's what I really try to do with this ministry Alt-Year. It's called Abundant Life Together. And it's all about inviting many people in the church, especially young adults, into that abundant life together, which is, for me, a real definition of Christian discipleship. Our first group in Toledo gathered last year. Toledo is a working class city hit hard by economic decline, but it's also vibrant and full of energy and new ideas and young people. And like Detroit and other Rust Belt cities, Toledo, in my opinion, is a part of the new American frontier, where citizens gather and out of necessity are reimagining what a post-industrial city looks like. So both in understanding what reimagining looks like and how we do that as disciples, and in understanding something like the theology of the cross, which is a key Lutheran principle that God is with us in our suffering. This is a context that I think is wonderful for that type of learning from the community around you, which is what we try to do in Alt-Year. In the photo you see here, I'm sitting in what's called a guerrilla garden, and it's near my neighborhood, the Old West End in Toledo, Ohio. And guerrilla gardens are, in a way, kind of like a version of hipster justice and culture change, but I really, really love it. A group of people, usually with the permission of the neighborhood, but not the permission of the local government, take over an abandoned lot and start using it as a garden and a gathering place for meetings and connecting with people in the neighborhood. It's a lot like building a fort when you're kids. And for me, I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, and my friends and I had a very Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn upbringing where we would go up to the hills and we would always be building forts and coming up with this kind of new society that we would be able to define and dream about. And in this context, you know, with these community gardens and guerrilla gardens, many new ideas are formed, and there are generative friendships that are formed. In the photo, you're going to see me pointing to a quote, and I want to see if anybody can read it. Everybody see that quote? Anybody know where that quote comes from?
So it's
any comments?
Yeah, even if the world ended tomorrow, I'd still plant a tree today. I feel like I feel like someone in the Holocaust said it.
Well, that's interesting. That's really interesting.
Andrew Romstead is saying Luther said it.
Yeah, it's a
Go Andrew.
It's a Luther quote. Hey, Andy. Yeah, this quote was not one that I wrote on this tree. I wrote some kind of more pagan quotes on the other side. This quote, it was written by the individual that really kind of gathered the original group that started the garden. A guy that's an agnostic, an anarchist, and he loves this quote. He found it on the internet, and he always remembered it. And this is a quote from Luther, and it's the gathering point for this culture. This tree cut down is next to the fire pit, which is kind of the gathering point at the guerrilla garden. And for me, it was great when we went to volunteer with the altars at the guerrilla garden. I was able to say, you know what? I recognize that quote because it was written by the guy that started our church 500 years ago. And in my opinion, that quote is one of the most important quotes that Luther has given to us for this time as well.
Awesome, and I'm just going to jump
Yep.
in. Deborah and some others who aren't seeing the quote, it's actually on the tree in the
Yes.
picture. Just to clarify that, it's like in that green and blue paint. So just to help people get caught up with you.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thanks so much, Don.
Yep.
Yeah, in my opinion, this is a quote that we should rally around as the church as well. There's so much fear about what the future is going to be like, um, worrying about the dying church. And, Luther did a lot of that too. And the church survived. That quote is a quote that really reflects the attitude that helped him and can help us as well. So if you can point to the next slide here, get to the next slide. So essentially, part of what I'm saying here is that the all-ear story and my story for getting it started is that I kind of built a fort. I built a guerrilla garden at the intersection of church and culture, and I invited other people to join me in it. And first, that was an invitation to leaders in the church that I trusted and who inspired me. And then it's become an invitation to young adults to come and actually live out this alternative year together, shaped by the countercultural values of discipleship that you see there. And if those are values that fit your values as a disciple, then come on over because there's plenty of room in the fort. You can switch to the next slide. Last year we invited some brave young adults to join us in this venture as we started the first site in Toledo, and God brought us this group of 8 young adults from 5 states, 4 from Ohio, 1 from Michigan, Minnesota, Washington State, and 1 from New Jersey. And our first applicant in admission was for Ian from New Jersey, and that was a great way to start because Ian is kind of a self-proclaimed Christian anarchist, punk rock kid whose hair changes color monthly, and he did his mentorship with us here in Toledo with pastors in Toledo, and he just asked them about vocation and what it takes to become a pastor to think about whether that was a calling for him. And that's the path he's on now, so prepare yourself for Ian ELCA because he is one of the people that God might be calling to leadership in this church. Just so you get a sense of what we do, in addition to mentorships, altars have Bible study, spiritual practice, and worship as part of their experience. We read books and watch films that take us into deep conversation about what matters in life and how we live as disciples. We use the surrounding community as our learning base, inviting leaders to share with us the things that drive them vocationally and the passions they have for justice and issues that are important now and in the future. We learn about other faith traditions. We spend time with host families from local congregations. We share meals with people from local congregations in what's called food fellowship. And then we serve in local ministries, congregations, and nonprofits as a major part of what we do. And those are we connect young adults with those places based on the experiences and issues that they really care about and want to explore. So in my opinion, it's pretty sweet. I'm of course biased, but even with all the challenges that come with starting something new in a pilot, we made it through the first year, and the participants shared an evaluation just how much they appreciated and got out of the experience. If you can switch to the next slide. In terms of the all-ear story, now we're inviting more people into this vision, and after this successful pilot year in Toledo, we're working with leaders in Minneapolis and St. Paul and Orange County, California, and several other places to have a multiple site launched in the fall of 2015. And I'm really excited for this because it's the original vision for the ministry that would connect people all over the church. And I'll tell you more about that story later in questions and answers if you want to. That's just the introduction to what I'm up to and what the alt-ear story is. But it relates to our lesson, and in a Mr. Miyagi way, it will probably come back later. So now let the lesson begin here. You can go to the next slide. One of the things I like to do is collect stories and tidbits of interesting information so that I can share it with others. And there's all sorts of fascinating and inspiring stories from within our Lutheran tradition that most people don't know about. And one has to do with the very name of who we are. I've heard a lot of people say that we should change the name of the church because we are, too centered on our founder, and that Luther never would have wanted it, to have a church named after him, and that might be true in some ways. But the thing is, we don't actually have a church named after our leader, at least not his original name. Now, I need to say I like the name Lutheran. I'm a Luther fan. He wasn't perfect. He did some bad things, and we don't worship him. But the story of his name change makes me like him and the church even more. See, Luther wasn't actually Luther's real name. His given name was Luther, and he changed his name to Luther after he discovered the gospel and realized that he was justified and forgiven by God. His old name Luther was a name given to loosed women, and his new name, Luther, was derived from the Greek word aleutero, which means free. So you see, Luther wanted his name to reflect the gospel that he experienced in his own life. The world may see him as a sinner or a looter, but he knew that God had saved him and set him free. So in signing his name, he was proclaiming that truth to the world. And I think it's fitting that immediately the name Luther became an insult for those in Europe who seek to protect the status quo. If you were a Lutheran, it meant that you were an activist, a troublemaker, a rabble-rouser, and not a friend of people in power. But what Luther wanted it to stand for was the freeing power of the gospel in his life, and that's what he wanted to share with the world, even though it got him into trouble. The next slide just kind of shows, what I think of in terms of how a church called free might act. I mean, what does it mean to be a church that's called free? What are we up to in the world? What do we look like? I think that is something we all need to figure out for ourselves, and it's one of the central questions I wrestle with, especially how our freedom can be lived out and magnified in how we liberate others from what hold them captive. As Isaiah 58 says, to loose the bonds of the afflicted and to let the oppressed go free. How do we become freed and experience that freedom in a way that helps us liberate others, both through faith and through an act of faith that helps others with what holds them back, both physically, economically, and spiritually. So I think that leads us into the invitation of Jesus into abundant life, and that's what we invite other people into, if you can show that last box. A big part of what I feel called to in the church is sharing these little nuggets of knowledge that can get lost in the shuffle of our own churchy business, but they can really have power to liberate. These ideas, these stories can have power to liberate and inspire others, and stories can do that. So I've been collecting stories and these kind of key concepts that I want to share with people for that purpose, like the name Luther. And to think that the name Luther was then shared by Martin Luther King Jr., the person that might be best known for freedom here in the United States and calling us to action to free others. Just want to show you this next slide. One of the key concepts that I've collected and tried to share with people is this understanding of rhetoric, and I share it with altars, and we actually shared it a lesson on this last year at this exact time in Toledo, and I think rhetoric is something we can understand in a few different ways. It's often understood as a way to persuade others, to convince others. And to be honest, a lot of people are scared of words like rhetoric because it sounds like a smart person word. Some people think we should avoid using terms like that sound difficult and to understand. And many of our theological terms are treated that way. But I'm a big advocate of not talking down to youth and young adults and not avoiding the challenge of sharing bigger concepts with them. And there's a real difference between communicating the concepts in a way that people understand and avoiding them completely. We can communicate them better in language that people can understand, but unfortunately I feel like sometimes we just avoid them completely.
I'm just going to jump in. When you were talking about, the history of Lutheran changing a name, and Bryant just said being called Lutheran is better than being called Melanchthonites. So, thank you, Bryant. I felt like that needed to be shared.
That would be a spelling issue for a lot of people, including me. But Yeah, just in terms of rhetoric and these more difficult concepts, I hope we're not afraid of them. I'm fine with people changing the term. And some people have told me they've done that with this lesson, and that's fine. You need to do that according to your context. But I've been teaching junior high and high schoolers about rhetoric for almost a decade now, and it's basically the exercise we'll use today. And the thing is they seem to get it. It's relevant to their world, the concept is, and it makes them remember the term as well. It helps them get a sense of self-awareness, and that makes them take themselves seriously and makes them see the other as something more than an intimidating force or a commodity, and I think we need to find ways of introducing that and helping youth and young adults see that. Yeah, I don't know. I think another thing is, I think youth and young adults want to feel smart, and one of the first things I say when I'm introducing a term like rhetoric or status quo or epistemology, these big words that seem scary, is I'll say, what I'm about to teach you will make you smarter than 90% of the adults in America. If you want youth or young adults on board, that's a good way to do it. And I just want to encourage you to not be intimidated by big words like rhetoric. If you can show the next slide. This is an example of rhetoric in action that I often use. My favorite historical figure is the Native American leader Tecumseh, who's actually from Ohio.
Yay!
Yeah, and he realized that the way to communicate with the white American colonists and later the people of the United States was to speak their language. And for him, maybe it's telling that he recognized that having a standing army was the way to do that. And he also created kind of like a League of Nations of Native American tribes. And he was making great progress, and it kind of scared the United States. And he was called into several negotiations, including the one that's pictured here with General Harrison. And at one point in this conversation, Tecumseh asked to move outside, and he sat on a bench next to General Harrison. And during the course of the conversation, Tecumseh would kind of move towards General Harrison, and Harrison would slowly, shift his body to move away from Tecumseh. And Tecumseh would do it again, and Harrison would move again, repeatedly until Harrison was almost off the edge of the bench. And at that point, he stood up, offended, and asked Tecumseh, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to push me off the bench? And Tecumseh said, well, this is exactly the way that Native Americans are being pushed off their land by white America. So that's a great example. If you want to know more about Tecumseh, I highly recommend it. It is a very important historical figure. If you can go to the next slide. Now we're going to get down to the actual exercise here. And this is the very simple Mr. Miyagi Karate Kid tool that we're going to use. And I call it the rhetorical triangle. Some people have adjusted this and turned it into a bow tie, which I totally approve of. Other people have, adjusted it in some other ways for their context. But it's a very simple tool, and for those of you that have a sheet in front of you, you'll be able to kind of write in some things as we go. For those of you that don't have a sheet in front of you and you're participating in the webinar right now, what we're going to do is have you give some of your entries for the different points in the triangle, and you're going to be able to send them in on the what do we call it? The feed, the live feed?
Yeah. So on the right side of your screen, there is a box for questions, and we can see that. So write in there. Josh is going to explain what you should write in there, but please do participate, and then I will repeat some of your answers to Josh so we can all kind of share in some of your context and experiences that you share. So go ahead.
Absolutely. So this is a tool for understanding your story first, and having some self-awareness about the things that have most impacted you in your life so far that have changed the way you see things. And then we use it as a tool, as you see with the blue arrow, we use it as a tool for meeting another person and hearing their story and hearing what's important to them. and recognizing that in that context and in that meeting, God can work and really change both parties in a very good way. So it's a tool for listening, and it's also a tool for self-awareness. And we're going to start with the self-awareness part. We're not going to be able to do the live meetings for people that are on the webinar like we usually do in a session, but people that are doing this later on will, maybe this is a good time to break out and spend some time on the triangles, filling them in. I'm just going to
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Perfect. If you want to now, or if you can pause and download this triangle. It's at practicediscipleship.org. That is always there. And if you are near other people, you could discuss it and come back. So go ahead and explain, but I wanted to know people can
That's
get
perfect.
this on paper if they'd like to at practicediscipleship.org.
That is perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now, the people that are typing it into the feed, what we're going to do is if you can't see it, what we're going to do is copy that feed in your entries, and we're going to put it on a document that you can download later. And what I'd like to challenge you to do, since we can't have a meeting with another person live, is to look at that feed and find some of the entries that are shared from another person's story that really make you curious, or maybe you see a connection. And I would like you to connect with that person that did that entry and see if you can set up a relational meeting, which we'll talk about a little bit later, a relational meeting where you can share your triangle entries and share your stories. So keep that in mind. I'm just going to do a quick definition of each of the points on the triangle. So for the cultures and communities, that's a list of maybe the cultures you grew up in, traditions you honor, and in thinking about how those things have shaped you and how you view the world. So that can be your faith perspective, that can be the type of community you lived in, whether you're in a small town or a big city, and to be thinking about those types of things and how they affected you. And then the experiences and relationships, that's a list of the experiences and relationships that have had the greatest impact on your life and how they shape how you see the world. So maybe an experience like being at camp, for a week when you were 9 years old, just change your entire perspective. Having a conversation late at night over a cup of coffee with someone in college and how that changed your perspective. Maybe a relationship with a family member that had a big influence on you. So what I'd like you to do is start sharing some of the entries that you have for culture and communities and traditions and experiences and relationships on the live feed, and then I'm going to explain, give an example from my life of each of those, and just continue to send in your responses as you fill out this triangle. Now the final point, the context, is really how you're feeling in the things that are happening right now or recently that maybe affect you in your process of hearing the other and during your meetings. So in the context, that's really where you meet the other. It's your setting, and it's amazing to think, and we don't often do it, how the things in our lives or the things going on in the world around us affect us. Now, maybe you're affected by a sickness in yourself or in your family, and that affects how you see things. That's part of the context. Maybe a current event has really affected you, like the death of Robin Williams or the issues with ISIS right now. So the context will be different for you depending on where you're at and what time you're in and what place you're in, and so that's part of the context point. And so feel free to start filling that out as well.
So it sounds like the cultures and communities were what existed before you were there. Your experience relationship part is how you experience it, and the context is the current time and place you're in.
Yes,
okay.
That is a very good way to sum it up. Yep, you bet, Dawn.
Great. Christina said culture and community. She was in the Navy, and she grew up with church as a duty, not a relationship, and she left at 12 and returned in college. So, growing up all over the place.
Yep.
Shar was, she just mentioned September 11th, which is a shared experience with many, many Americans and other people around the world. So go ahead. I just wanted to jump in with a couple stories and please do continue to write in.
Yes, thank you. You can go to that September 11th slide right now, maybe. Now, a lot of people, might struggle with, oh, is this a experience, a relationship, is this a culture? Don't worry about that too much. This is your story, and you can shape it the way you want to and the way you feel like it connects, and that can be part of what you share with that other person is why you put it where you did. Can you go to the 9/11 slide, please? So I wanted to bring up the fact that we're meeting on September 11th, and this is an experience that's a shared experience for us as Americans, and people around the world have some type of memory or connection with us, I'm thinking as well. If you have an experience of 9/11 that you wanted to share, feel free to share that on the feed. But one of the reasons I brought it up was because sometimes experiences can shape culture and change culture, and 9/11 is an example of how that happened for us as a nation. And you can really see some ways that it really changed the way we as a nation saw the world and saw each other. And that happened in positive ways, and it probably happened in negative ways as well. Just wanted to, bring awareness about that and honor that day, and also use that as an example of a way that a shared experience can change culture as well. If you can flip back, to the shared culture slide.
And while he's flipping, I know he already got there. You're so quick. Kelsey just said Kelsey grew up in a home with 2 autistic siblings, so it changed her perspective on life and how people view and realize there's still people of Christ. Thank you, Kelsey.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, based on our context in what we're doing right now, I think some common cultures, communities, and traditions can be assumed. Like probably most of the people on this webinar are U.S. residents. Most of them are probably Christian. Most of them are probably Lutheran. And most probably have a familiarity with church culture. So those are some assumptions that I bring to my communication with you. And not all contexts are going to be like that. But that's often the starting point for that point of the triangle, is listing some of those things, your faith, where you live. And we probably have a lot in common in this group. If you can go to the next slide. One of the communities that really shaped my experience was Holden Village, which is a Lutheran retreat center in Washington State. And if you want to do a Where's Waldo and see if you can find it in this photo, go for it. I'm the smallest person in this photo. That's your hint. My parents worked at Holden Village, working with a young adult ministry called Life Enrichment, which is one of the models for Alt-Year. And they did that for 6 years at Holden Village. And this year was their last year there, and I was a baby. And my family moved away from Holden Village to a little town in Wisconsin. And while I really appreciate my upbringing in Wisconsin, I have to say that the people I lived around, the people I knew in friends and family, they all had a shared experience of Holden Village, what it meant to live in Christian community in the mountains, to have theology be a part of their daily experience. And that was an experience that I didn't share with them. I didn't know what Holden Village looked like except for looking at pictures. I didn't know those shared experiences. But I learned from them, and it made me curious about them and made me want to be a part of a culture like that, a community like that. And that can really happen where you missing some kind of shared culture that other people around you have makes you want it more. And maybe that's something that can happen with the church as well, that we can invite people into a culture, even if they haven't been a part of it before. But the way that we talk about it becomes something that is appealing enough that they want to make it part of their stories too.
And I'll share a few more stories. Mike grew up in the ELCA household. It was an experience and relationship that changed him. But what really changed him, is getting involved in campus ministry. So I know a lot of people experience intense Christian community through campus ministry. Christina had a cancer diagnosis and remission as a young adult, age 26, which shaped her priorities, but then she had a second experience of joining a neighborhood ELCA congregation and discovering the women in the church who helped her discern her call to word and sacrament. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, Marin is 9/11, and do we know what happened? And if you want to say more about that, Marin, and how that shaped you, I'd love it. Shar grew up in Montana, and everyone helped their neighbors, a normal course of life. And then she moved to D.C. 3 weeks before 9/11, and that changed her in ways that she can't take life for granted. So thank you to all of you who wrote in, and I know more are writing in, but I'll let you jump back in, Josh.
Well, I can just say, I can reveal, where I am in this photo if you haven't found it yet. I'm in the bottom left corner for those of you that can see the photo, and I am a little baby, and that's my dad holding me. And like I was saying, this was an experience that really, or was a community that in a culture that really shaped who I was, even though I wasn't actually a part of it. And there's so many biblical stories that take us to that kind of understanding. People living in exile, people that aren't able to be in the community that they know, but they hear about it and they feel called to be a part of it.
So that brings up a really good thing. We talked about 9/11, and then Christy is saying she had a devastating tornado in her community, and there was pain and fear, but a real sense of community developed. So can you talk a little bit about the ways in which really devastating events shape communities?
Yeah, let's move to the next slide and move to experiences and relationships. So that just kind of reminds you of what the triangle looks like. And then if you can go to the next slide. So yes, there can be devastating experiences that can be communal experiences, and they kind of are both a culture and a community, and also an experience, and how you live that out together is really an opportunity for change, and for how you respond to that as a community rather than as individuals can really change that community forever. And many people have positive stories about how disasters in their local community have changed their communities for the better. It doesn't make sense. It's something that I want to learn from. I'm a part of a nonprofit that's dedicated to social entrepreneurial disaster relief called Renegade. And one of the things we're trying to do is just listen to the people that are in the middle of that experience, the personal experience of loss, and then the communal experience of being reborn in a way, and in reimagining what community looks like through that care and that shared experience. So it can be extremely powerful. Do you have another one, Dawn? I'm sorry.
Yeah, this one isn't so much about an extreme experience, but Allison was raised in a small town in a Lutheran church that she enjoyed relationships, music, theater, and a loving family. So I think that's a lot of our background, is just the general, going through life knowing you have that solid fabric woven underneath you. Thank you, Allison.
Right. That's really interesting. The experiences and relationships that I was bringing up
yes.
are just the traveling that I was able to do to that was all self-funded, but it was an ability to hear people's stories and see new places, and I was basically since high school I've been trying to go to places that captured my imagination in terms of how young adult community was lived out. And I've got slides there of an agriculture school I visited in Madagascar that helped shape one of the elements of alt year, and the Media Village in Cape Town, South Africa, which is a youth with a mission school, which really helped me hear stories that were amazing of young adults from all over Africa that came together to learn media skills at the school and then go back to their home countries to develop media. And, there's these ideas that just, it's amazing that they're out there and that we can learn from them, and they make you question, like, well, what are we doing, here in the United States or here in the ELCA? Why aren't we doing something like this? And so they can really affect your understanding. And for me, those meetings with people and the relationships that have been built through those journeys have really helped me form what Alt Year could be.
And Jay Krogstad shared part of his journey. Thank you, Jay. I'm going to read part of it, the beginning of it. He grew up in a small town in central Minnesota. There were 11 different churches and only one ELCA, a community of white American people until he was in high school, when they became a star city, meaning they would bring in people from different parts of the country that needed to be moved to a better place.
Mm-hmm.
So one of his experiences was his pastor. He grew up going every Sunday but not knowing why, just because, forced to go, which some other people have written into.
Yeah.
But the pastor in ninth grade changed it. He sat down with Jay at a retreat and talked about what it means to be a Christian, why it's important to follow Christ, and it opened his eyes and made him want to go to camp. And now camp is his passion. He's a youth director in northern Minnesota. So thank you for sharing that story, Jay. There's a lot of stories out there about being forced to go to church, but then they realized it's part of their culture. Bryant said something along those lines as well.
Those are great. Yeah, keep them coming in. Keep sending some stuff in. I really look forward to seeing your entries for these different points of the triangle.
Yeah.
I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, but I had the benefit of being a next door neighbor of a Mexican Native American man who taught me Spanish when I was a little kid and when I was homeschooled, and was a great influence on my life for seeing a different perspective. And I was just back in town, and I met with this Chinese woman who is actually a princess in China, and she lived way down the line, but she's ethnically part of like a royal line, and she had a shop called East Meets West in my hometown, and that was a great experience of having these cultures meet in this place you wouldn't expect, that I benefited from in my small town experience. So if I can shift the slide, we're going to try to clean this up so we have time for questions and answers. So we can go back. And now the final spot is the context, and I just want you to be thinking about this next step of like how thinking about these cultures, communities, traditions, experiences, and relationships in your own life prepare you to meet the other and to care about the other's story. And that's the context. That's where we meet the other person. If you can shift to the next slide. I wanted to ask, what are the challenges of meeting someone new or different than we are? What are the things that get in the way? If these are both Karate Kid images that you'll see on the screen. There's so many things that get in the way of us making that contact. If you can write in a few on the feed, that would be very helpful. I just kind of want to see what people would say. Obviously, these ones are, there's some fear of physical conflict in these meetings from the Karate Kid. But that's usually not the case with us. But there are so many things, hopefully. But there are so many things that do hold us back from initiating a conversation in connecting with someone new.
Wonderful. And while people are putting that in, I'll share a couple other contexts and things that changed people's perspectives. Rod said attending seminary and being immersed in theology daily changed the way he sees himself and the church and the world. And Allison said summer camp and Catholic campus ministry, where she was the token Protestant, and then young adults in global mission, where she developed cross-cultural relationships and learning how to be in an active community of giving. And she also was Holden Village. There's a fellow Holden Village person for you, Josh.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is one, and then I'm just scrolling through, sorry. Jeremy's culture, he grew up with a single mom and grandparents, and the grandparents moved in to help her, and then when his grandfather was diagnosed with Parkinson's, that changed his view. So that's another kind of personally extreme situation where he learned to want to make a difference in lives because of this happening, and his own eyes were open to how people suffer. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much for
Jessica,
those. Yeah,
yeah, so
isn't it so
good.
rich to hear other people's stories like this? To
Oh
really
my
think
goodness.
about the richness of the Christian community when we share stories.
Absolutely. Jessica wrote that she grew up in a Catholic church where she didn't have any youth group until her mom started them, and she worked at an ELCA summer camp for 2 summers, and that was transformative. I think a lot of us have that story of working at a summer camp, or all these other, young adults in global mission, urban servant corps, eventually alt year, having kind of that transformative Christian community. It's And Jessica was saying that she saw what Christian community can do and mean, especially when it's all you have in the middle of the woods. Yeah, you're very cut off from everything else, and you have to make community work in a very different way. Jeremy wrote that grew up, his grandma and great-grandma forced him to go to church, and he didn't appreciate it for what it was, and fell out of the church during college but came back, and that strengthened his faith by helping youth. And he was recently given the position of youth minister, so yay, that's good news too, of having that whole story and path that brings you back. Shar said it all comes down to self. If I believe that Christ is alive, the interaction takes a much different meaning. So thank you all for sharing these things.
That's great.
We have a few minutes left. I do want to make sure we get through all of your content too, Josh.
Sure. Yep, that's helpful. Yeah, did anybody give any entries for, what are the challenges of meeting a new person?
Not so far.
Okay.
They're coming through though. There's a slight delay with all the technology, so thank you for asking. Actually, Christina says fear, not knowing how to begin the conversation. Shar says purposeful living leaves the outcome to God, so you just suit up, show up, and leave the rest to Him. Thank you. So there's a couple entries so far, and there's more coming in. Thank you.
So, yeah, those are good points. Anxiety is a huge one. Wondering if somebody is going to like you. That's huge for youth and young adults. Am I cool enough to have a conversation with this person? If you're a youth director, think about how that controls a lot of the interactions in youth and young adult culture. I mean, that's huge. Now, the next slide shows you what I hope can inspire us as we really see ourselves as called into those connections, even though they might make us uncomfortable. Just to remember that we are freed from those fears. We are free to meet people, and it can be a liberating experience for us and a liberating experience for them, and a reminder of the gospel message that Jesus has taken care of the most important things for us, and we're freed from our fears to do things like courageous things like meeting a new person. And I love the translation that when you meet the other, you're meeting one of God's masterpieces. And remembering that in these meetings, that's really where the Holy Spirit works, in the sharing of stories. And we're called to honor those stories and not to jump in with, this is what I think, this is what I think is true. And that really gets to some of those models of accompaniment in terms of mission, rather than kind of the colonial idea of like, we're just going to tell you the right way to do things. Well, that doesn't really work long term. And in this Christian context in the United States right now, we're in a mission field. And a big part of people hearing our story is offering the opportunity to listen to their story. So
and Rod dovetails nicely with you, saying listening to another is the most important tool you can develop in meeting them. Thanks, Rod.
So this gives you a tool for listening, and for those of you that are extroverts, you might think, you don't need this tool, but think about it a little bit, because you might be the one talking all the time, and you might not be afraid to meet somebody, but are those meetings effective ways for the Holy Spirit to work with two people meeting and sharing stories? And introverts, sometimes you need a tool, a way of framing a conversation and an interaction. So I hope that this triangle can be helpful for you to have in your head, if not in your hand. Can you go to the next slide? Just to let you know, what I did, this is the Mr. Miyagi part. What I just did was help you get a sense of how to do a relational meeting, which is the foundation for congregation-based community organizing. And I'm a community organizer and part of the community organizing cohort in the ELCA, which is a group of people that recognize the need for this type of listening and invitation and empowerment of people through meetings where you connect them to address issues that you all care about and all share. The questions that we ask in relational meetings aren't just kind of, hey, how are you doing? What do you think of the weather? You go deep. You go deep with that person in a way that unveils their passions, unveils things that they maybe haven't realized or have forgotten about themselves. And we really need that in this culture that is so fast-paced and always go, go, go. The Holy Spirit works through the sharing of our stories to reveal God at work in our lives in the past, present, and future, and we are all witnesses.
So I'll jump in with a couple more of the barriers, and maybe you could pick one to really address here. There's more than that, of course, than we can address in these next couple minutes. But people talk about how our neighborhoods, Christina said, our neighborhoods and communities are often self-segregated and it's easier to stay put. That's a very honest answer. Sure. And Michael said age and generation seems to be an obstacle. The adults support the youth, but they don't have a desire to spend time with them, and youth take offense and hold a grudge. Andrew said assumptions about others is often a block to relationships with others, particularly if they're not from our culture, or even if they're within our culture, we can make this mistake. So could you pick one of those and, you know.
Well, yeah, I would pick one of those and do what?
And just kind of address some of those fears and how this rhetorical triangle helps people get past some of those.
Yeah, I was assuming what you were going to say.
Yes, no, go ahead.
Assumptions are huge in recognizing that we have assumptions, stereotypes, and that they affect how we connect with people and who we connect with people, or what people we connect to. And that is a huge issue and a huge challenge for us to say, I want to connect with somebody that is very different than me. And to actually seek that out. Maybe people that you have assumptions about and you passed over, or maybe somebody that's from a community that you've never been a part of. And I swear, when you do that, it teaches you so much about yourself. It teaches you so much about what God is up to the world. And it reveals so many things that you wouldn't normally do. So I challenge you to do that. The intergenerational dialogue and how generations treat each other is probably the biggest issue in the next 10 to 15 years, specifically how boomers relate to younger generations. There's huge issues, $17 trillion of debt that younger generations have been left. There's environmental issues that threaten to destroy the world as we know it. And we've done very little to address those things. And we need to find opportunities for people to come together about these huge issues that matter. And you can't really do it in text messages, and you can't do it in bullet points. You need to actually sit down. You need to share information. You need to share stories. And we need to figure out how we can work together to get some things done. So I would love to see the church be a part of that dialogue and drawing people together and using what we have in communities, in our influence throughout the country, in our own lives, to start that dialogue, because I think that is a huge issue, and we need to meet the other and come together at the table.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for being with us. We are at time, but I just want to make sure I said thank you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, and if you can slide through those other slides at the end, just questions. So this webinar, along with all the others in the series, was recorded. So if you missed anything as we went along, you can download it at the Practice Discipleship website, which is practicediscipleship.org. You see it there on your screen. So please download it. Please share it. This is for you. This is a resource. People in your church council, adult forum, whoever comes to mind that really should hear this information. You can also download from the Practice Discipleship site videos and curriculum from previous years. This is our third full year of Practice Discipleship webinars, so there's a lot of good information
information there for you to share. Each synod in the ELCA has a practice discipleship coach who's been trained to offer seminars on these webinars locally in your own synod. Training events are posted on the website, so please keep checking back for updates. You can also find event dates on the Network app for iPhone and Android. The Network app is pretty fun. So it's a free app. It gives you anytime access to videos, news, calendar of events, an interactive prayer wall, and much more. Check that out. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our page, you can search for Practice Discipleship Initiative, and at Twitter we're at ELCAPD. You can also catch more of Josh next Tuesday on the network's 3TC, that means Third Tuesday Conversation. He'll be joined by Rosella White to talk more specifically about the Alt-Year program and how to encourage and support young adults in gap year ministry experiences. Our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, October 9th at 1 p.m. Central. You can do the math for your own time zone. The title is Framing the Vision, Seeing Things New with Mindy Mackint. And I apologize, I do not know Mindy, and I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. See the Practice Discipleship website for more upcoming webinars and for all of us to get to know her better. So thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you again in October. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks.